You know, before the Great War, the crown heads of Europe were basically one big, tangled family. We're talking cousins, uncles, and nephews, all descendants of one woman, Queen Victoria. So you have to ask, how did a family feud escalate into a global catastrophe? Well, today, we're diving into a controversial history that places one man right at the center of it all, Britain's King Edward VII. Okay, let's really get into this, because it's the big question, right? On one side, you've got King Edward of Britain. On the other, his own nephew, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. And tangled up in all of this is Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, who was a nephew to Edward by marriage. I mean, they called each other Willy and Nicky in their letters. And yet, their empires were about to get locked in the deadliest conflict the world had ever seen. Now, the standard history books, they point to treaties and political tensions, but what if the real story is way more personal? A story of deliberate, calculated manipulation right inside the family. So, let's start with the man they called Bertie, King Edward VII. For decades, he was just the Prince of Wales, a guy who seemed to live for a good time. But the historical account we're exploring today argues that this public persona, well, it was the perfect cover for a much different and, frankly, a far more dangerous game. Now, what's so fascinating here is just how different these two pictures are. It's like night and day. The world saw Bertie, the fun-loving playboy who drove his mother, Queen Victoria, crazy with his gambling and his affairs. But behind the scenes, a totally different story emerges. This interpretation argues that even though foreign affairs weren't officially his job, he was acting as the real foreign secretary, a master diplomat who was personally steering Britain's course, pulling the strings of European power. And here's the thing. He wasn't playing this game alone. This narrative talks about a powerful cabal, a secret society of Britain's absolute wealthiest and most influential men, later known as the Milner Group. And their goal? Pretty simple. Expand the British Empire's reach and control global affairs. So what's the king's connection? Well, one of his closest friends, Lord Esher, was in the society's inner circle, and this account claims he kept King Edward in the loop on everything. So, with this powerful group in his corner, what was Edward's main objective? The strategic isolation of the German Empire, which just so happened to be ruled by his ambitious and, let's face it, pretty volatile nephew, Kaiser Wilhelm. This wasn't just a series of random events. It was a strategy. It was a geopolitical chess game, and Germany was the target. The opening move was, honestly, brilliant and incredibly bold. In 1904, King Edward personally pushed for the Entente Cordiale, a cordial agreement that settled a bunch of old colonial disputes with Britain's historic rival, France. Publicly, it was all about peace, but strategically, it created a powerful Anglo-French bloc. It was the first major step in building a cage around Germany. But France wasn't the only piece on the board, not by a long shot. The next move in this big chess game involved Belgium. Now, officially, Belgium was neutral. But this quote from a German diplomat at the time hints that something else was going on. A secret backroom deal. A bargain between two kings that made that whole neutrality thing a complete myth. And this slide really lays out the alleged deal. It's a classic quid pro quo. In exchange for Britain looking the other way on Belgium's, let's just say, controversial takeover of the Congo, Belgium's King Leopold II secretly agreed to a military pact against Germany. So, years before the war even started, the path for British troops to enter the continent was allegedly being paved, and another wall in the encirclement of Germany was quietly put up. All right, so France is secured. Belgium is neutralized. There was one final, absolutely crucial piece needed to complete the cage. The massive Russian Empire, ruled by Tsar Nicholas II. Getting Russia on board was the endgame, and King Edward had a very specific, very personal plan to make that happen. Now, the plan wasn't to win over the Tsar directly, at least not at first. No, it was about finding a pawn. And the source points to this man, Alexander Izvolsky, a courtier described as super ambitious, a bit of a suck-up, and just desperate to please powerful people. King Edward saw him not as an equal, but as a useful tool, someone he could shape and put into a position of power. And this wasn't some chance meeting. Just look at the timeline. This was a deliberate, multi-year process of cultivation. It kicks off in 1904 with a personal meeting where Edward starts talking about his hopes for an Anglo-Russian agreement. He strengthens that connection a year later. Then, by 1906, Izvolsky is brought to London for 3 whole weeks, and, according to this account, becomes completely sold on the king's agenda. So what's the final step? Getting him the top job in Russian foreign policy. And here it is. This account basically presents this as the smoking gun. King Edward personally writes a letter to his nephew-in-law, the Tsar, just gushing about his Volsky, essentially recommending him for the job. He's using his family authority, his position as the elder statesman of European royalty, to vouch for his hand-picked guy. It's a totally stunning piece of personal diplomacy, and it's about to have enormous consequences. So, what's the bottom line? It worked. After Edward's glowing recommendation, Izvolsky gets this amazing promotion and is appointed the Russian Foreign Secretary. With their man now controlling Russian foreign policy, the British elite could steer the massive empire towards an anti-German alliance. Russia was effectively in their pocket. Okay, so the board is now set. You've got France, you've got a secretly compromised Belgium, and you've got Russia being guided by a puppet minister. The only thing left to do was make the alliance official and publicly seal Germany's fate. This was the final move in Edward's grand strategy. And the setting for this checkmate? A so-called royal rendezvous at Revel in 1908. Just look at this table. The official story that was sold back home to the British Parliament was that it was purely a family visit. But the reality? No, a little different. King Edward didn't just bring his yacht. He brought the head of the Royal Navy and the Inspector General of the Army. This was not a vacation. It was a war council disguised as a family reunion, all designed to finalize the military alliance and, as the source puts it, to seal the triple entente. So let's just quickly recap the whole strategy. Step 1, the alliance with France, creating that powerful Western bloc. Step 2, the secret deal with Belgium, which completely gutted its neutrality. And finally, step 3, the masterful manipulation of Russian politics to bring the Tsar into the fold. It was a patient, it was a ruthless, and ultimately it was a totally successful plan of encirclement. And there you have it. The Triple Entente was complete. The diplomatic cage was locked shut. Kaiser Wilhelm's Germany, which had been the dominant power in Central Europe, now found itself surrounded on all sides by a trio of hostile powers. An alliance engineered, according to this narrative, by the patient hand of his own uncle, King Edward VII. Which really just leaves us with a final, pretty unsettling question. We're taught that World War I was caused by these vast abstract forces, militarism, nationalism, imperialism. But this account suggests a different story, something far more personal and direct. A Game of Thrones, really, played by a secret elite, where family bonds were just another weapon in the arsenal, and one king's diplomatic brilliance set the entire world on a path to war.